Hi and welcome to the Peak Endurance Podcast. My name is Isabel Ross and I'm the coach at Peak Endurance Coaching. Episode 78 is a myth-busting chat with Brodie Sharpe. Brodie is the host of the Run Smarter podcast, and we've previously discussed RED-S, Relative Energy Deficiency in Sport. Brodie is a physiotherapist and the owner of the Breakthrough Running Clinic. He aims through his podcast to help runners expand their running knowledge and become faster, healthier, smarter runners. It's ideal for injured runners and runners looking for injury prevention and elevated performance. His podcast also covers tips and tricks to overcome your running injuries, interviews with leading researchers, other running podcast recommendations, reviews of running books, and much more. In this interview, we discuss some myths that abound in the running community in an effort to establish some truths. Are injuries or persistent niggles ruining your enjoyment of running and hindering your performance? Get on top of these now so that you can get back to the simple joy that is running. Come in and see the specialists at Health and High Performance, where, utilising the latest in technology and experience, they can help you get back to your running best. So, to achieve your running potential, go to healthhp.com.au/run to book an appointment and get back to feeling how good it is to run without pain. Please don't forget to get on over to Apple Podcasts to rate, review and subscribe. It really does help me when I'm approaching high-profile guests to get them on the podcast. Thanks so much for your support. I do appreciate it. I'm currently in the process of accepting new athletes into my coaching programs. If you are interested in getting some quality structured coaching, I have limited spaces available at the moment. Email me, isabel@peakendurancecoaching.com.au, or DM me on socials. I hope you enjoy the interview with Brodie. Hi, Brodie, and welcome to the Peak Endurance Podcast.
Thanks, Isabel. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to get started.
Yeah, no worries. We chatted earlier this year about RED-S, and how have things been going for you in this COVID world since then?
Look, business-wise, it's business as usual. Like, I'm thankful enough to have a physio business that's 100% online and just started that prior to COVID. So it's actually quite opportunistic now that, and trying to, well, now people know what telehealth is and people know what it kind of looks like now. So I don't have to explain it as often as I found myself doing when I very first started. But yeah, podcast-wise, business-wise, it's business as usual, but getting pretty over not spending time with friends and family.
Yeah, totally get it. And I'm sure all the listeners do too. Now, we've been chatting about busting some running myths. Shall we sort of go through the major myths that are out there?
Of course, yeah. Let's dive in.
All right. Well, firstly, running increases the likelihood of knee osteoarthritis. I mean, you always hear that whenever you run, people say, "Oh, doesn't that wreck your knees?" The non-runners, obviously. So bust that myth for us.
Yeah, sure. And we can't really blame runners either, because they've been told this by some health professionals, sometimes doctors, especially those who aren't runners, like you said, that they say, like, especially if you do have knee pain, they're like, why are you running then if you have knee pain? Or why are you a runner? Don't you know it's bad for your knees? And what people think kind of makes sense, because if we think osteoarthritis is a condition or a pathology that's wear and tear, that's a term that's used quite often. They think it's degenerative. So they think that with repetition, with pounding the pavement, hundreds of thousands, millions, several million times, it's eventually going to wear out. It's eventually going to break down. It's eventually going to degenerate and, all that fun stuff. So that makes sense. And that's why that belief is out there. And that's why that belief people ring very true. The research, on the other hand, is quite the opposite. And so the research shows that actually pounding the pavement and actually creating that ground reaction force stimulates a lot of bone growth and stimulates a lot of cartilage growth. And if someone is really struggling with, say, bone density, having like a lot of ground reaction force and these kind of shocks that ripple through your body actually stimulates a lot of bone growth. And there's an enormous study that's been done, which I quote several times, seems like several times a day, where they have they found 125,000 people, and they did a meta-analysis, so they collected all the available evidence that's currently out there, put it all together, and found what was the prevalence of osteoarthritis in the knees for certain populations. And they found that for recreational runners who do participate in regular activity, is the prevalence of osteoarthritis was 3.5%, so not a whole lot. And they found that for the same population with the same baseline characteristics, so the same age, the same percentage of gender, that kind of thing, but if they're sedentary, their prevalence of osteoarthritis was more than 10%. Wow. So you're 3 times more likely to get knee osteoarthritis if you're a sedentary type compared to if you're a runner. And so it's very encouraging for runners to show that it's actually good for your knees, and based on runners maintaining a healthy weight, psychologically they're a lot better. They're usually stronger around the areas of the knees because they usually have stronger legs. And like I was explaining before, it stimulates a lot of cartilage growth and a lot of bone growth and promoting a lot of strength. So if we know that to be true, then it obviously makes sense why runners have less knee osteoarthritis. And there's been a ton of evidence to support as well. If someone does have moderate forms of osteoarthritis, you can still actually run. It's still healthy for the running population to continue running with knee osteoarthritis, but we need to just make sure that they're still maintaining as strong as they can. They're doing a lot of strength work outside of running. They're still maintaining, or we're keeping a close eye on their weekly mileage, making sure there's no spikes in training. And if a flare-up does happen, which is quite normal, we do have like a flare-up kind of plan in place, and making sure that we're still keeping them strong, keeping them engaged, and it can be quite healthy for a runner.
Now, you say recreational runners. What about, ultra runners when they're doing quite long distances? Is it the case of more is better or not?
It still counts as recreational runners. Like in that same study of 125,000 people, they did have a subcategory of elite runners, and their prevalence of osteoarthritis was 12%. So they're actually higher than the sedentary type. But what the elites were, they classified elites as those who either represented their nation or those who are paid athletes. So very, very top tier. So they're probably overworking themselves with enormous amounts of mileage, and probably tipping the scale of like the breakdown to repair kind of equation, where it's no longer stimulating bone growth. It's actually like been a bit too much, and the recovery is a little bit less. And that's my theory anyway. But when it comes to the endurance athletes, they all counted as recreational. So within that study, that all counts as recreational. So I would recommend that you just don't overdo. You don't just really push your body, making sure if you do work high mileage and you are involved in the ultras, that you do emphasize recovery, and you do prioritize very heavily on sleep, nutrition, and getting all that good stuff, just to make sure that the body isn't breaking down and is building up and getting stronger as a result of it.
All sensible things to do anyway. Alrighty.
Sounds sensible, doesn't it?
Yeah, sometimes not that easy to do though. All right. Myth number 2, stretching helps lower the risk of injury and increases your performance or recovery.
Yeah, myth. We can bust that one. So
thank God.
This is, exactly, because no runner likes stretching. We all know this. And every time I talk to a runner and I'm like, oh, how's your running going? They say they're injured, and they say, I know I probably should stretch more. I hear it so often. And the current evidence that are out there shows that static stretching, or stretching in general, doesn't do anything to reduce your risk of injury. It doesn't do anything to increase your running performance. There might be some small studies out there that show that stretching outside of running, so on your non-running days, if you participate in yoga or something, might do something to help recovery and might do something to aid performance, but it's too small to really tell. Those with the really heavily weighted studies, like there's a mountain of evidence to show that there's not really much that comes in the way of reducing risk of injury or increasing performance. And in my mind, it kind of makes sense because as a runner, as a recreational runner, we're not putting ourselves through end of range too often. We're not, the running action isn't really like a dancer or like a gymnast or like a swimmer with their shoulders or something like that. We're not really putting ourselves through end of range. But what we want to do before we run is prepare your body for what it's about to do. So like the warm-up preparation phase. And if you're going for your weekend long run, where you start off pretty cruisy anyway, you don't really need to emphasize warming or preparing the body. If you are doing like sprinting, or if you're doing intervals, or if you're doing hills or something like that, you'd probably want to emphasize the warm-up portion of it. And what you do in that warm-up, as long as you prepare the body for what it's about to do, so you wouldn't go straight into a sprint. Like I said, we need to be sensible. But I also don't say not to stretch. What I do say is try stretching a little bit, try stretching a lot, try dynamic, try foam rolling, try static. Just trial and error a whole bunch of these, and whatever you feel is really good for you, then that's what you go with. But try not to convince yourself otherwise of what it's trying to achieve. So if I just go out for a weekend long run, I stretch maybe 5-10 seconds per muscle group just because I feel better. If I'm doing an interval session, I'll focus on slowly building up my speed. I'll focus on doing a little bit more dynamic stretches, a little bit of static stretches, but I'll prioritize that a little bit more. But like I said, we can't convince ourselves of what the stretching is actually doing. What we're doing is making ourselves feel better. And that's the main reason. And if we have runners come to us and say, I'm injured. I know I'm injured. I know I keep getting injured because I don't stretch enough. What that is doing is putting a focus on stretching and taking our attention away from what's actually causing some injuries, which might be rapid changes in training. It might be doing too much too soon. It might be they're under recovering, but they're not actually focusing on that because they have the belief that they just don't stretch and that's why they get injured. And so that's why I stress the message, and that's why I try to create a lot of this clarity and bust this myth, because it can be very unhelpful when we're talking about focusing our attention towards injury prevention.
So stretching can be good, like if it helps you feel better and relaxes you and that sort of thing. There's no actual harm from it as long as you do it carefully. It's not going to enhance your performance specifically.
It's definitely not harmful. You can't really overstretch. Similar, like people believe if they stretch cold muscles that it's going to create some damage. It really won't. Your body's pretty resilient, and your body does have these like little receptors inside the muscle that forbids you to stretch beyond its capabilities to strain or cause damage. So you're not really going to do too much, and it is similar to like massage and similar to a lot of those ideas that are out there around foam rolling, massage balls, Theraguns, all those sort of devices. We're doing it to feel better, and it could reduce our pain levels, but it's usually only just short term. It's not really a long-term strategy, but we're just mainly doing it to make ourselves feel better.
Yep. All right. Myth number 3. I should do endurance strength training to be better at endurance sports.
That makes sense, doesn't it? It's similar to like
I've heard that
osteoarthritis, and it's really hard to convince runners to start some strength training. You've probably found that yourself.
Yep.
And once they eventually get into the gym, or once they're eventually convinced to start some strength training, they start doing bodyweight stuff. They start doing their bodyweight calf raises, lunges, squats, and it's usually in the high rep range. It's usually 3 sets of 15, 20, 25 reps, like really, really high rep range, really, really light weights. And the clear research has shown that if you want to improve running performance, you need to start emphasizing heavier weights. We obviously need to do it in your capabilities within your experience. We don't want to jump straight in and do something that's too heavy for you, because that's a sure sign of injury. We want to make sure that you're safe within the gym, you have the right technique. We slowly load you up so that you adapt and get stronger. But the emphasis should be to lift heavier, somewhere around the 8 to 12 rep range, so that when you do a squat, we load it up appropriately, so that by rep 10, by rep 11, it's starting to get quite difficult. And by rep 12, you probably shouldn't be able to lift 1 or 2 reps more. So we're looking at that kind of heavier side of things. Put down the weights, rest for a couple of minutes, and work your way through about 4 sets of those. The exercise itself doesn't need to be too technical. Can be your simple calf raises. I like to do calf raises with a bent knee as well. Squats, lunges, deadlifts, very basic stuff, but can be really beneficial for runners and running performance.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in heavy strength training. And so how would you periodize it at all throughout a program, or would you say you just do heavy the whole way?
Periodization depends on like the goals like a runner has. It depends if they're training for a marathon or if they've got an ultra coming up, how much time we have to work on. But that would just depend on the individual, like their individual goals and their timeframes that they have available. But if it comes to busting the myth itself, like I tend to think if you want to become a resilient runner, you kind of want to have 3 buckets that you want to fill up, because the muscles and the tissues within the body, they have these certain components. One is the endurance component. We really want to fill up that bucket. The second being the strength bucket. We want to fill up your strength. And the third being power, or like plyometrics, some sort of quick release things. If we're filling up all those buckets and your body adapts to all those, you can throw a lot at your body and it will hardly break down. And you might find that someone's really, really strong. Someone is an ultra marathoner and they can squat pretty heavy. But as soon as you do some like quick acting, like rocket jumps or some really quick firing sort of stuff, and do that through like a high intensity gym session, and they've broken down the next day, that's because we haven't really targeted the plyometric side of things, the quick releasing component. And so what runners often, like, it doesn't make sense that if you were to go out for a run, do your long runs, you're training that endurance, you're filling up that endurance bucket. And sometimes a lot of these runners, they have that endurance bucket filled to the brim. Yeah. Then they go into the gym and they train more endurance, and they're just trying to fill up that bucket that they've already covered, when in the meantime, that plyometric and that strength bucket is hardly filled. So definitely endurance is very important, but use your endurance for when you're running and doing all that running program, all that fun stuff that we love doing. While you're in the gym, you might as well spend some time addressing those other buckets in order to become more resilient. And there's tons of evidence to show heavy strength work helps with your running economy. It helps with how efficient you use your oxygen, how it's circulated and utilized throughout the body, which is a big component when it comes to endurance performance. So marathon and ultra marathon performance, if you can work on your oxygen efficiency and your running economy, then you have a big advantage to all of your other components.
Yep. Sounds good. All right. What about the myth, I get injured because I have flat feet?
Yeah.
And I better go out and get my orthotics.
Yes. And this is like, we can refer to a ton of studies that get a whole bunch of runners. There was one that looked at a couple of thousand of runners and looked at their feet. They had a look at their type of feet. So there was overpronated, pronated, neutral, supinated, oversupinated, which is like all those 5 different types of categories. And they just got them to run the same mileage and saw who got injured first, at what rate, that kind of thing. And they all got injured at the same rate. They all got put into a neutral shoe and they all got injured at the same rate. And if anything, the pronators got injured slightly less than all the other runners, even if they're all running at the same mileage and they have the same type of shoe. Most of running injuries are due to training errors. We know this. Like your episodes, done a ton of past episodes. I listened to your the one with Ryan Twist, the podiatrist, and we're all in agreement. It's training. It's acute training. It's too much too soon. It's spikes in load. This is what causes an injury. And sometimes it's on the under recover. So you either overtrain or you under recover, wherever that balance is. And it doesn't really matter in terms of technique. It doesn't really matter in terms of strength. It doesn't really matter in terms of foot shape. What does matter is pushing your body beyond its capabilities and pushing your body above its ability to adapt. That's when things start breaking down. And that's what the research shows, and it fits in with what the research shows.
Yeah. So, and obviously that's at a different level for everybody, and that's what people need to work out for themselves, isn't it, as well? or in
Yeah,
conjunction with
yeah.
their
And
coach.
I do think there is some tailored advice we can have for people if they have a particular type of injury compared to their running style and compared to their strength. But if we're looking at a global collective of runners, there's zero correlation. But if we have, say, someone who comes in with knee pain and they've had knee issues for a very long time, then we have a look at their running and we see that they're heel striking, they've got heavy shoes, they probably run at a low cadence. We can definitely start addressing their technique. We can definitely start manipulating some things. We can start wearing lighter shoes. We can start, elevating their cadence, because the research shows that the load will dissipate away from the knee. Sometimes it could just increasing your cadence by 10% can reduce the loads on your knee by 20%.
Wow.
So that's enormous, but we're not reducing the overall load. It's just moving somewhere else. So it can move to the Achilles, it can move to the foot, it can move higher up into the hip. So when we're talking about pronation, which is the myth we kind of started off with, if someone does have, say, plantar fasciitis, and we do look at their ankles and they do have, say, a narrow step width, or they're running with flimsier shoes, like less supportive shoes, sometimes making slight adjustments, maybe changing their cadence, making these slight adjustments can be helpful for their recovery, but then they can probably revert back to their old technique or their old shoes, but just avoid their spikes in training. So it can apply to the individual as well.
Yep. All right. What about the shoe you need depends on your foot shape?
Yeah. And this is like a common experience when people walk into a shoe store. Like they say, I need new shoes. Okay, let's have a look. And they look at their foot shape. They look at the foot shape and say, okay, you're a flat foot, neutral foot, high arch. And then they straight away go to the shoes and be like, this is what you'll thrive in. And they try and correlate the shoe, the foot shape with the shoe type and say, this is what you'll thrive in.
And that makes sense.
It does. All of these make sense. This is why they all exist. And we've all seen the marketing kind of the collapsing arch, the collapsing foot, and the bowing of the Achilles, and how everything falls out of place. And then they've put into a supportive shoe, or they're put into an orthotic, and everything magically aligns, and you've got that side-by-side comparison. It all just makes sense, and they make billions of dollars on it. But again, because we know that people get injured because of spikes in training or exceeding their load capacities, it just doesn't show up. And when it comes to foot or shoe prescription, we know that you're most likely going to thrive in a shoe that you find most comfortable. And that might be supportive shoes for someone who does have low arches, but an identical runner with low arches won't thrive in someone with supportive shoes. So there's zero correlation between the shoe type and foot shape. And what I do recommend for my runners is to try a whole bunch of different ones. Make sure you try supportive, make sure you try not so supportive, light, heavy, whatever have you, the type of heel drops. Just find what fits most comfortable for you. Go for a run in those shoes. Whatever you find more comfortable in, that's what you're going to thrive particularly in. However, if you do try and transition to a different type of shoe, make sure it's gradual. Make sure you're not just straight away going into something that's a bit more barefoot than what you're used to, because that's a surefire way of injury as well. But I think Ryan Twist, the podiatrist he had on, kind of was agreeing the same thing. He talked about things like comfort and like everyone thriving in a different type of shoe. And there's no real correlation between like a type of runner and a type of shoe. Did mention something along the lines of different types of shoes for different abilities. If you're going to a trail or if you're going to do a track, there's different, I guess the shoe serves different purposes. A different type of shoe serves a different purpose. But yeah, don't be fooled if you go into a shoe store and they say, you've got flat feet, you need this type of shoe.
Yep. Yeah, what's comfortable is always the best, because, you want your feet to be comfortable. Very important.
Absolutely. And that takes us to the point as well of like how often you should change shoes as well. And often I say, if it starts to lose comfort, like if it starts to become uncomfortable to run in those shoes, then they're probably getting a bit too worn out. But that's quite a long way down the road before they start becoming uncomfortable. I often have three reasons why you should change your shoes. One, if there's real significant wear and tear. So if there's really significant wear of the sole underneath, and sometimes if the rubber kind of wears through to kind of the midsole, so like that the fabric kind of changes color or changes texture, that's very excessive. You should probably change your shoes then. Or if you've got holes in your shoes underneath, you should probably change them then.
Oh, yeah.
If they become too uncomfortable, then that's the second one. They should change shoes. And the third is if they're so worn out that they change your biomechanics too acutely. Like if they start to change how you're running, definitely get them changed. So those are the three reasons why. That's in my opinion, but they're the three reasons why I think people should change shoes.
No, I mean, I personally like wear a variety of different shoes. Like of my road shoes, I have a few different brands. Of my trail shoes, a few different brands, because I think it's good for my feet to be, or helps them running in different shoes. Is that a myth?
No, like I personally like changing types of shoes as well. I think if you have ones that have more support, if you have ones that don't have much support, if you have ones that are lighter, if you have ones that have a different heel drop, what you're doing is you're adapting to all those shoes and you're essentially becoming a more resilient runner. You're essentially training different things, training different components. And as long as you make sure that you have adapted to those shoes and you haven't made a drastic change in something, then you're going to be safe and you're going to be a bit more resilient. You're kind of keeping the body guessing in a way. And it'd be the similar, if someone wants to do a gym routine and they have the same gym routine that they go through every single time, they get strong, and they're quite capable. But then if you give them like a change in direction or a lateral movement or something that they're not designed for, if they do that too often, then they're going to break down just because they're not used to that change, not used to that different direction, the different forces of the muscles, that kind of thing. A running shoe can be very similar. You can, as long as you adapt to a whole variety, then your body's going to adapt to variety, which is what we want for resilience. But also, if you're very smart about it and you know the different types of shoes, and I do this frequently as well, you can use your shoe, the different types of shoes, as a tool. So if on a particular day your calves are getting a little bit tight, then you'd wear like the supportive ones or ones with a higher heel raise to take load off of the calf and the Achilles. If you wanted to, if your knees are particularly sore on a day or you don't want to overload your knees on a particular day, then you go with the lighter shoes. And because evidence shows that lighter shoes help reduce loads through the knee. If you wanted to, on a particular day, try and run fast, try and do a PB, try and do things, evidence has shown that a lighter shoe helps increase performance. So you're using your shoes as different tools and during certain circumstances, which can be extremely helpful.
Yeah, that's always been my theory behind it all too. So I'm glad to hear that it's not a myth that I've been perpetuating. Okay, myth number 6, I should completely rest my injury and let it heal.
Yeah, I go on about this all the time and it's a big mistake because like all these, they make sense. Like if you're injured, it makes sense to rest and let your body heal and that kind of thing. But it's often like, I think stress fractures would be the one exception to this rule. If you do elicit some sort of bony stress, you do need to significantly offload it. If you have a stress fracture, you do need to take a significant amount of time off to let that body part heal. But if you have things like a tendinopathy, if you have things like plantar fasciitis, if you have, say, knee pain, like a runner's knee, complete rest is very rarely the solution. And you will definitely need to back off your mileage. If you've had an increase in a spike in training, we definitely need to back off. But this introduces what I call the pain rest weakness downward spiral. And it is a runner has a spike in training. They have whatever structure, let's say it's the tendon flares up and becomes quite sensitive. And while that tendon is sensitive, it can't tolerate the same levels of load that it used to. So it actually becomes weaker. It can tolerate less, so it becomes weaker. And if it's inflamed and people think they need to take rest, they completely rest. And let's say for a week and they decide the body's going to heal in a week, let me try and see how it feels. But you're combating a weak structure with complete rest, which generates more weakness. And so in a week's time, when you go back to running and you do your usual 5Ks and it flares up again because it's weak, because it flares up again, becomes more sensitive, able to tolerate less load. And then you think you interpret, it's just not healed yet. I need more time. So then you take another week or two off. And then after, in a blink of an eye, you've had 3 weeks of no running. It's extremely sore and sensitive, and it's just completely weak. And then you're like, oh, maybe I'll just go for a light jog. Maybe I'll just do a light jog, and maybe that exceeds it, and then it becomes flared up, and you're just continuing down this downward spiral where you're tolerating less and less and less. Over the course, it's getting weaker, and becomes more and more painful. And plantar fasciitis is a big one when it comes to this. Tendons are a big one. Knee pain is a big one. So this myth of let me just completely rest is often unhelpful, but does need like the right guidance. You do need like a health professional, someone to guide you through what you can tolerate, or interpreting the right type of symptoms, or where your starting point actually is, and just doing the right things from day 1, day 2, day 3. This is the whole idea around my podcast, the Run Smarter podcast, making smarter training decisions. And if you do have niggles, or you do have an injury arise day 1, this is exactly what you need to do day 1, day 2, day 3. So it turns into a 5-day injury instead of a 5-month injury.
Now, you spoke about deloading. What about those runners who have sort of constant niggles and they can constantly deload? What happens if there's someone who seems to be always having one niggle after another?
I'd question their recovery. I'd question their training loads. I'd question a couple of things. If it's constantly one type of area, like a common one would be your middle-aged male who constantly gets calf strains, constantly gets calf strains, and it's recovered for a couple of weeks and then it's gone again. I'd question if it's a weak link, if there's strength that needs to be addressed, if they have a particular weak link within that kinetic chain. But if they are looking quite strong and they're still getting niggles here and there, I'd make sure, okay, since you're operating at such a high mileage, you obviously know that we need to prioritize recovery, right? We need to make sure that we have good quality sleep. We need to make sure that we have quality nutrition. I want to make sure that if there are particular times of stress, unavoidable necessary moments of stress, we don't build up high mileage in that particular week. These are the decisions that we need to make. And if you're constantly getting niggles, I would try and make sure all those boxes are ticked. If those boxes are ticked, then we need to start looking at things like just interpreting symptoms, making sure that we're our individual maybe shoes or style, like maybe your running technique might need to be tweaked here and there. Maybe they need slight higher cadence or something like that. But if you're getting constant niggles, it's not a normal thing. If you're operating at really high mileage, if you're an ultra runner, you are definitely going to get niggles, but we learn from them. We overcome them with like action steps. And if another niggle arises somewhere else, then we kind of like start putting out fires. But if it's constantly happening, then we definitely need to look at your overall intensity or your overall recovery and see if we're meeting those standards.
It's amazing how so much of it really just relates back to recovery, and it's the one thing that many runners struggle with incorporating the most.
Yeah, overtrain or under recover. It's going to be one of those, an acute change or under recover. And most of the time in the marathon scene, like in the ultra kind of scene, they're usually used to building up a big base, and they're usually used to slowly progressing through their mileage or slowly building up and adapting that way. But they do need to recognize the more and more mileage you do, the more and more you need to prioritize recovery, and you need to prioritize a good night's sleep. And like I said, sometimes you get a job promotion, you have a newborn baby, you move house, and it's usually associated with stress, poor quality sleep, those sort of things. They're unavoidable, but we need to recognize that in those moments, whether it takes like a week or two, we recognize that and don't spend those weeks doing that high mileage or those intense training sessions. We take a relative time off, and then when you're back to sleeping well, when you're back to eating well, and you're not constantly stressed, that's when we can start building up the mileage and building up the higher intensity kind of sessions.
Mm. Can I ask a sort of segue into this question? During COVID, are you seeing more or less injuries because of, people have more time for running, but they also have more time for recovery and certainly more sleep and that sort of stuff. So are you seeing a rise or a fall in injuries?
Um, I'm seeing a rise in running related injuries, but they're from people just starting to run. They're from
Yeah.
like the new runners. And that's because their gyms are shut down
Mm.
and they want to still maintain fitness. And they tried to buy all the gym equipment, but that's all sold out. So they don't have any other option
Yeah.
unless they decide to pump up their tires on their bike. But I've had some people be like, yeah, I just decided, I haven't ran for 15 years. I used to run when I was like younger, but I've just been doing gym and gym classes and now they're all closed. So I just decided to go out the door and see how far I can run and how fast I can run. And I'm just
Yeah.
like, no wonder you've got bilateral calf strains. You've just
Yeah.
pretty much just tried to challenge your body and put yourself through way too much.
Yeah.
And so I have seen that population, kind of the non-runners,
Yeah.
go out there. Um, that would be like a general uptick. The runners, like, I haven't seen a lot of people take a lot of time to enhance recovery. I think in general, they know that recovery is important, but the practical applications or actually like implementing the smart decisions
Yeah.
isn't necessarily there. But yeah, so during COVID, I'd say that the injuries have definitely climbed up because
Yeah.
time availability and just deciding to get out running. But like, yeah, people rarely prioritize. They don't say yes, more time to recover. They usually don't do that.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I just thought it just was wondering I had. All right, myth number 7. I have chronic pain because there is still tissue damage that hasn't healed yet.
Oh yeah, this could be a whole episode in itself because we touch on to some pretty technical integrated kind of concepts, and I have 3 episodes on my podcast totally dedicated to pain science and why people experience pain. And the first lesson that people can learn is that all pain is generated from the brain. It's not generated from your peripherals or your tissues. It's all generated from the brain, and the brain decides when there will be pain, and the brain decides at what intensity and what severity the pain should become. Looking at the tissues, like if you inflame or if you overload a tendon, if you strain a muscle, if you let's say you tear some cartilage or a meniscus or something, the body heals. The body takes anywhere from a couple of days to a couple of months to heal, depending on the blood flow to that area. Like there could be some ligaments that don't get a lot of blood flow. They take a little bit longer, but tendons, muscles are very rich in blood. And so they heal a lot quicker. But as we know, it sometimes takes weeks, months. Sometimes people persist with pain for years and years and years. When we do scans and we find that there's no damage, like it's already been healed, but they still experience pain. A lot can be said for low back pain and the scans they do, and there's no correlation between what they're seeing on the scans and the amount of pain or symptoms that someone's encountering. And so what's happening is during an injury, let's just say you've had a calf strain because you've overloaded yourself, because you did some hill sprints or something like that. Your brain tends to learn in those early days that certain things cause pain. So running might cause pain, doing hills might cause pain, running in bare feet or like minimalist shoes might cause pain. And the brain tends to evaluate these things and create beliefs around what generates pain. And the brain's an amazing thing. It wants you to go away from danger. And so that's when it sends pain signals. It's for your survival. As the injury goes on and as pain starts to generate, if you start to create the beliefs of maybe running is dangerous for me or hills are dangerous for me, or maybe my injury hasn't healed yet, if that belief is still in there, what's the brain going to think as soon as you start running? It's going to think, what are you doing? This is dangerous. And without there actually being a physical tear or anything that's involved with your anatomy, the brain's going to say, we're in danger, I'm going to send pain signals. And that's where we get chronic pain. Especially, it's amplified if the rehab is inadequate, if you haven't really built up the confidence, or if you haven't been educated the right way, if you haven't been told that it's healthy to load a certain joint, it's okay to get back into running. Let's build up some strength to generate your confidence. That can be implementing these things can be really nice to settle down the brain and reevaluate things. But if it's associated with a lot of anxiety, a lot of like depression, if you're no longer doing what you love and you're being put away from running, if you have these beliefs that running is dangerous, or my tendon hasn't healed yet, or maybe there's something else wrong with me, there's not a diagnosis, I had these scans and they showed nothing, what's wrong with me, I don't have these answers, and there's a whole lot of puzzling confusion, that elevates the threat, and that the brain, processes all those beliefs and all those anxieties and all those thoughts, and then we'll start continuing to implement a lot of pain. So it's a long-winded answer, but when it comes to the myth of a chronic pain means that the tissues and the injury itself hasn't healed yet, there's a lot of pain science and a lot of research to show that the injury itself is healed. The pain is still there. You're not making it up, but it's just because the brain, we haven't worked on your confidence. We haven't educated you the right way. Your rehab has been inadequate, and the brain is just delivering pain because it still perceives whatever you're trying to return back to as a threat.
So how do we get out of that?
Yeah, good question. So it depends on the individual. Like I said, if they do have maybe unhelpful beliefs, if they think that they're just not ready, if they think their tendon is about to snap because it hasn't healed yet, if they think that, let's just say they shouldn't be, like if it's low back pain, if they've been told that they shouldn't be lifting for the rest of their life, if they've been told that running's bad for your knees, like why the hell are you running? Running's bad for your knees. And they create that belief. That's obviously one component that needs to be addressed. So just the right education. The second being confidence, like building up your level of confidence. Because often people think when it comes to tendons, they've been told that tendons don't heal. They've been told that if you overdo it, your tendon will snap. They've just like created this language and been told this language that's very, very unhelpful, and people can catastrophize a lot of this return back to sport or return back to running. So that needs to be addressed as well. So a lot of it is addressing the psychological component, but then we can address with physical components. We can have a really small stepping stone like into place. So let's just say you have calf strains and you're really worried about going back to running, and you get all this pain as soon as you start hopping, or if you start jogging on the spot. We can say, okay, well, let's just start with some calf raises, double leg calf raises, nice and easy on a step. How does that feel? Are you getting any pain? Let's just say they're getting 1 or 2 out of 10 pain. Actually, that's a pretty good level of pain. We're really happy with that because it means that we're challenging the structures, but it's not flaring up to a 4 or 5 out of 10 pain. Then we go from double leg calf raises to single leg calf raises to weighted single leg calf raises. We do them a little bit quicker. And then we go from that, then we go to double leg, just jumping on the spot. How does that feel? And then we slowly work their way up this progression ladder to the jogging on the spot. And then they may be skipping. Then they may be just doing some walk, run kind of like intervals, 1 minute on, 1 minute off kind of things. And we're just slowly integrating them back to where they want to get to. And in that process, not only are we allowing the tissues time to adapt and build back up to where they were, but that same process calms down the mind. It increases your confidence and becomes just that little bit of evidence that the brain needs to be like, oh, this is cool. I can manage this. I can handle this. And there's no pain. There's no flare up. I'm not causing more damage. And then all those steps in that ladder just returns you back to running. And chronic pain is a difficult one. We're not just necessarily working on the injury, we're working on the individual. And that's where it's no longer just rehab. It's like dealing with the psychological side of things. And just like lastly, any other concerns that they have, any other questions that are puzzling them, make sure that it's all out there. Make sure they have the right answers. Because I always say, if you go see a physio, make sure you ask the right questions and make sure that you understand the answers, because it's very hard for someone who's maybe a little bit timid to like voice up and be like, so what's actually wrong with me? Or what's my plan of action? Sometimes it's very uncomfortable for people to do that. But if then the therapist replies with a really complicated, over the top kind of answer, and you're still a little bit puzzled with the answer, you're then again too shy to reconfirm or like reiterate your question. And that's a big sign for the brain just to be like, what the hell are we doing? We have no plan of action. We don't even know what's going on. We don't have a diagnosis. And they're just like puzzled the whole entire time. That's never a good thing. So make sure you're asking the right questions. Make sure you get the right answers and that you understand the right answers. And make sure that your recovery is active, making sure you're empowering yourself and not just relying on a therapist that does massage or dry needling and that's it. And that's empowering you along the way. And that's how we tend to manage chronic pain. And hopefully that was a very long-winded answer.
And
but
basically
like I said,
also, what I'm getting from that also is I know sometimes people feel embarrassed to ask questions because they don't want to look silly or like they're being a hypochondriac or something. But, as a physio, you're saying ask those questions. It's okay.
Of course, yeah. And like I said, I did 3 episodes on pain science on my podcast, so I'm trying to like just jump it all into like a 5-minute answer. But exactly right. As long as you have clarity, and it's your body and you're trying to recover yourself, you need the right answers. And
exactly.
You need to, even just like if they give you a treatment plan and you say like, is this evidence-based? Just like a question like that, like it's your body and it's your pain. So you should have full responsibility and you should be empowered and walk away with a lot of confidence.
Yep. No, that sounds good. All right. Well, that was quite a few running myths that we busted there. Thank you so much for that and for sharing your knowledge with us. And I hope people have gotten a lot out of that. Where can people go to? You've got your Run Smarter podcast. Where else can they find you?
Yeah, so I am active on social media. I'm probably most active on Instagram. So my handle is Run Smarter Series. And so that's the handle. But I do recommend like the first call to action would be to check out the podcast, but definitely check out the first 10 episodes of the podcast. So the first 10 cover the 10 principles to overcome any injury. And we've covered a lot of the principles like the pain, rest, weakness, downward spiral that we talked about today. That's just one component that I mentioned in these 10. And that's what people should go to before they scroll through all the other episodes and find what's relevant for them, because there's injury specific stuff as well, and interviews with like researchers and that sort of thing. But if you like Instagram and you like following people's social media content, then you can go there. And then just natural progression. If you want to reach out to me through social media, if you have any other questions, then we can talk about it specifically and see if you want to do some online physio, if it's necessary to do some online physio. We'll just take it from there.
Sounds good. All right. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Isabel.
See ya.